What's going on guys, Jin here. This is the Mythic version of the previous Quill Volley build I uploaded, and it's got some mixed in elements from the Overpower build as well, whilst maintaining high armor and resistances for a good amount of tankiness. It's capable of clearing all of Torment 4 without issue, of course, and it can push to 115 pits and beyond, depending on how good your masterworking is. So before we get into it, if you like these guides, please leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment if you want, for the algorithm, as these things all help out a lot in growing the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. So thanks a lot everyone, and now let's go. So starting with the skills, we're just going to take Rock Splitter and Enhanced Rock Splitter. Then in our core skills, we're going to take 5 into Quill Volley, and we're going for the Advantageous Quill Volley. Then we're going to take 3 into Follow Through, 1 into Vigorous, and 3 into Balanced Exertion. Then we come down to our focus skills, we're taking 1 into Vortex, 1 into Mirage, and 3 into Unrestrained Power. We're also going to take 1 into Focal Point, and 3 into Apex. Then we're taking 1 into Ravager, and we're going to go for Measured Ravager. Then in our defensive skills, we're going to take 1 into Endurance to go for the 3 in Perseverance. We're going to take 3 into Armored Hide, going for the Reinforced Armored Hide. 1 into Patient Guard. 1 into Counter Attack, going for the Reinforced Counter Attack. And then 1 into Scourge, going for Adaptive Scourge. In our potency skills, we're going to be taking 3 into Resilient, 3 into Brilliance, 3 into Potent, and 3 into Furnace. All passives there, and then in our ultimate skills we're also going to take 3 into the passives of Resolution, Spiritual Attunement, and Supremacy. And we're also going to take 3 into the Hunter, and get the corresponding nodes. Lastly, we have our key passive, and we're going to be taking Prodigy's Tempo here. For the skill assignment, we'll have Armored Hide, Vortex, Ravager, Scourge, the Hunter, and Quill Volley. Next up we have our Paragon Board. So for the Paragon Board, it will be very similar to the previous board, only a few minor changes. If you do want to check out the non-mythic version of this build, I recommend checking out the video in the description below, or check out the build planner here. That's going to have everything including the gear, skill tree, spirit, mercenaries, etc. So we're going to start with Fulminate. That's going to give us extra lightning damage and a multiplicative lightning damage bonus, as well as dealing 12% increased lightning damage to both healthy and injured enemies. For our second board, we're going to be taking Vicious Shield, so we do 1% increased damage for each 3% of our maximum life we have as a barrier. And for the glyph, we're going to be using Spirit, so that gives us multiplicative damage to elites, as well as a lot of critical strike damage. Also, critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from us by 3% for 20 seconds, up to 15%. Our third board is going to be Convergence, so we deal bonus damage equal to 20% of our 2 highest bonus to damage types combined, and that's up to 30% total. As for the glyph, we're going to be taking Talon, so that gives us a lot of extra Eagle skill damage, and also multiplicative lightning damage. Also, our Eagle skills deal 15% increased critical strike damage, multiplicative as well. For our fourth board, we're going to go up from there, and we're going to be taking the Sapping board. So when we cast 3 Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle or Centipede skills with the same spirit in a row, restore 15% of our Vigor, and deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. As for the glyph, we're changing this one up, we're not using Revenge anymore, we're using Menagerist. So dealing damage with our Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle or Centipede skills increases all damage we deal by 4% for 10 seconds, stacking once per spirit. And this glyph is also giving us a lot of bonus to our magic nodes within range, which is important for our maximum resource. And we also happen to get a bonus to our incarnate skills damage. For our 5th and final board, we're going up from there and we're going to get revealing. So on lucky hit, we have up to a 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies, and we deal 30% increased damage to crowd controlled enemies. As for the glyph, we're going to be using Colossal here, that improves our gorilla skill damage, and gives us a multiplicative damage to close enemies bonus. Also, we deal 2% increased damage for each stack of resolve we have, and that's going to come into play heavily for this build. So that pretty much wraps up the Paragon board. Let's get on to the Spirit Hall. So for the Spirit Hall, our main aspect here is going to be the Jaguar. So every 15th time we deal direct damage to an enemy with the Jaguar skill, we unleash an additional strike dealing 15% of the damage we've dealt to them in the last 0.5 seconds. And all skills will now also be Jaguar skills. For our secondary, we're going to be using Gorilla, so we get 2 maximum resolve, and also when we have at least 5 stacks of resolve, we are unstoppable. So that pretty much eliminates any chance we have to be crowd controlled. Next up we have the Mercenaries. For our hired mercenary, we're going to be using Rawhide, and for his skills we're going to be taking Shield Charge, Rawhide's Guard, Provoke, and also Mocking Lure. For our support mercenary, we're going to be taking Variana, and we're going to be using Earthbreaker. So this has a 17-second cooldown, and whenever we use Scourge and it is available, she will knock all enemies down around her repeatedly over the course of 3 seconds while also dealing physical damage. So that wraps it up for our mercenaries. Now let's get on to the gear. So as this is the mythic version of the build, there's not going to be too much variation. If you do want the non-mythic version, as I said, check out the build planner in the description or my previous video. So we're going to start with the helm. We're going to use the Harmony of Ebewaka here. So that gives us all stats, movement speed, damage reduction and velocity ranks. And according to our secondary Spirit Hall choice, our skills will all be additionally Jaguar, Eagle, Gorilla or Centipede depending on what we choose. So in our case, Gorilla. Also, our skills deal 10 to 30% increased damage per spirit type they have. And as for the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork the damage reduction. Next up for our chest piece, we're going to be using Tyrael's Might here. That's going to give us movement speed, maximum resistance to all elements, and damage reduction. Also, while at full life, our skills will unleash a Divine Barrage, dealing 845 damage. So you're going to try and masterwork the damage reduction here. Next up we have the gloves. We're going to be using some normal gloves here, and we're going to be looking for ranks into Quill Volley, attack speed and armor, and we're going to temper that with barrier generation and basic skill damage. And for the masterworking, go for Quill Volley. For the aspect, we're going to be using unyielding hits, so casting a gorilla skill increases our weapon damage by 10 to 30% of our armor for 3 seconds, up to a max of 1500 bonus weapon damage. Next up we have the pants. We're going to be using some normal pants, and we're going to look for something with armor, maximum life, and ranks into basic skills. And as for the tempering, we're going to try and get maximum resolve stacks and barrier generation. For our aspect, we're going to be using the aspect of interdiction, so we will gain 1 to 15% block chance per resolve stack. And for the masterworking, we'll masterwork the maximum resolve stacks. Next up we have the boots. We're going to be using some normal boots here. We're going to go for some maximum life, some armor, and some movement speed for our affixes. And for the tempering, you guessed it, barrier generation and more movement speed. As for the aspect here, we're going to be using Duelist, so our maximum ferocity will be increased by 1 to 5. And for the masterworking, we're going to masterwork the maximum life. Next up, the weapon. We're going to be using a Rod of Kepeleke, or whatever you want to call it. That's going to give us some maximum resource, critical strike damage, chance for core skills to hit twice, and ranks to velocity. For the tempering, we're going for maximum resource here. And for this weapon's aspect, our core skills are now additionally basic skills and also free to cast, but deal up to 30% reduced damage based on their vigor cost. So when you cast at maximum vigor, your core skill will consume all vigor to return to full damage, and also become guaranteed critical strikes, with 1 to 3% multiplicative increased critical strike damage for each point of vigor spent this way. Next up we have the Amulet. We're going to be using a normal Amulet. We're going to be looking for total armor percent, dexterity, and ranks into potent, although it might take you a long time to get those ranks into potent, so if you can't get that, then use something like ranks into furnace or brilliance, something that will give you a multiplicative damage boost from your passives. And we're going to try and temper this with maximum resolve stacks and basic skill damage. As for the masterworking, we're going to be masterworking on those resolve stacks. Next up we have the rings. We're going to be using a Ring of the Midnight Sun as our first ring. That's going to give us dex, critical strike damage, cooldown reduction, and ranks into Mirage. But more importantly, the aspect. When we critically strike, we gain 20 to 50% of the vigor we've spent in the last 2 seconds, and also we gain counterattack's passive effect. So this is how we're going to keep our vigor full between every hit in order for our Rod of Kepeleke to consistently crit and deal full damage with its aspect. As for the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork the cooldown reduction here. For our secondary ring, we're going to be using a normal ring with dexterity, max life, and attack speed, and we're going to temper that with resource generation and basic damage. For the masterworking, we're going to go for the attack speed. And lastly, the aspect, we're going to be taking the aspect of the Moonrise, so damaging an enemy with a basic attack grants 4% attack speed for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times, and on max stacks you gain 40 to 100% basic skill damage and 15% movement speed for 10 seconds. Next up we have the gems and the runes. In our Tyrael's Might we're going to be using Pock and Quay, so whenever we spend 300% of our maximum resource, we'll be able to invoke the Druid's Earthen Bulwark skill, and that's going to grant us a barrier. And in our weapon, we're using Zol and Zal, so we will gain 150 offering whenever we invoke a skill from another class, which will be the Earthen Bulwark I just mentioned, and when we reach 200 offering, we gain 20% maximum life for 6 seconds. As for the gems, the helm and the pants are both going to house our purple gems for barrier generation. And in our jewellery, we're going to have a diamond in the amulet for the resist all, and we're going to have skulls in the rings for the armour. If you happen to have a greater affix on the Tyrael's resistance to all elements, then you could also put a skull in the amulet. So that pretty much wraps up the build. It's more than capable of doing all endgame content in Torment 4, and can push up to tier 115 pits and beyond, no worries, provided you get the masterworking all set. The rest of the build is relatively attainable outside of Tyrael's, which even then isn't so bad thanks to how these sparks work. After this build there'd only be one more build to transition into for pit pushing, which would be an overpower version of the build, which is even more reliant on proper masterworking, as I've been working on a set for that for over a week already. I hope you guys have a fun time with this build and that it helps someone out. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed or made it this far, please leave a like, subscribe, comment for the algorithm stuff, and hit that bell button as it helps out a lot. Really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!